It is a great honor to introduce a tremendous CEO and operator, the leading provider of cannabis in Canada and abroad, and the largest cannabis company by market cap in the world, Bruce Linton.
It is actually to be a New Yorker. As a Canadian, I routinely get accused of not being very Canadian, and the reason for that is I tend to like the idea of being a bit bold and aggressive and doing things internationally. I think I feel more at home when I'm pitching U.S. investors than Canadian investors, and it's because I find the U.S. market, people actually think big. And a lot of Canadian investors want to know, can you be the best company in the east corner of the province you currently reside in? And it's a good challenge. But when I started Weed and then Canopy, one of the ideas we had was that this might catch on. And if it did, you want to think international and you want to think scale. And so it's part of the reason from the first day we began, we had the idea that everything should be digital and should be scalable. And if you didn't have the ability to actually have a computer and place your order, we could have a special line to help you, but we really did want people that didn't try to call Amazon and ask them to place the order for them. It needs to be online. So, do we have a slide or no? What's going on here? No slides? I don't really need slides, I just like a microphone. So, I started a thing called Tweed. We occupy what used to be the Hershey Chocolate Factory. People may have heard this line before, but when you want to get media in, what you really need to have is an opening line. And if you want to get investors in, you have to make them relax. And I can promise that when you fill a Hershey Chocolate Factory, or former Hershey Chocolate Factory full of weed, and you tell them the reason you did it is you wanted to actually know for sure why the Oompa Loompas were so happy, it allows the media to have an opening spot. And it allows the investors who, when you first meet them 5 years ago, stand like this saying, I'm really quite uncomfortable with this topic, but I'm staying because I need to know. If you can actually bring them on the journey with a little bit of humor, hey, that's a really good job, man. Far better than I was doing. You now have a way to start the journey. And I came back this year to present because I was here, I can't remember if it was 3 years ago or 4 years ago, and everybody who's seated right there represented my total audience. The person who was sitting in the front had an animal that gave him comfort. But it was the first time I'd ever seen somebody whose animal wasn't like a dog. It was a rabbit. And his rabbit was really well behaved. In fact, it sat on top of his hat, on top of his head, the entire presentation. And so, it was the first time I actually presented to a rabbit. And I commented to him at the end of the presentation, I didn't know if it was the big ears or what, but the rabbit was super attentive. And I had one guy who was sitting about there, who was from Vermont, who on at least 3 occasions said, I'm moving to Canada. I'm moving to Canada. I can buy weed from the government. I'm moving to Canada. How do I get your weed down here? Do I have to move to Canada? No. So my recollection of the event was rabbit, and we probably actually have a citizen in Canada now because of the structure of our governments. So I'm Bruce. I love the titles of chairman and CEO. As many of you know, you should be an entrepreneur if you actually want a good title, because you get to pick whatever you are. And so, in good governance, they will tell you that you shouldn't be the chairman and the CEO. And I will tell you that in the marijuana sector, you should be. And the reason simply is, if I hired someone or picked them to be my chairman, and I'm in a business that every 3 to 6 months has an entirely new time horizon, if I have gone from having 4 target countries I could work into 29, if I've gone from 400,000 square feet to 6 million square feet, if I've gone from one market which was medical to now which is going to be medical and rec in Canada, if you pick a chairman and say try and keep up but don't work in the business, how do you figure that works out? So I highlight that in that I don't think we're going to build any of our businesses if we listen to the common wisdom that tells you how they ran the pickle factory and why you should run your marijuana business the same way as they run the pickle factory. And so don't cave in as being one of the reasons we got somewhere. I kind of hate this slide, but I'll put it up briefly. Who is Canopy Growth is a good question. That answer is terrible. And I sent a note to my slide making people this morning that said it should have 2 things. It should have Tweed and Spectrum. That's who Canopy is. And under that, we should describe the fact that we have 1,000 people who've joined our company, and that every one of them has stock options. So if you're Vic the cleaner, you have equity in our company. And if you're the PhD, you have equity in our company. And the reason that matters is it should feel in every tech company like it does in a marijuana company. So if you go to Google, do you think people are kind of moving slowly, kind of ho-hum, or are they kind of collaborating, sharing, thinking, treating each other as peers despite different responsibilities? So what we are 2 brands powered by people who are actually powered by the fact they're all owners. And Tweed was my first brand, and I picked Tweed because, well, when I started, I had my personal building company name because in a prior life, I picked a horrible name for a company. And it was intended to enhance the web. And what I was trying to do is get a whole bunch of people out in the world who would allow us to understand how the internet was working, and then we could tell companies like Amazon, eBay, and others how to make the internet work better back in the early stages of the internet. And because I was a techie and I was working with techies, when you're enhancing the web, what you call it is web enhancer. But if you say it fast enough, it sounds like web cancer. And so with that business, I spent 2 years explaining I was not putting tumors on the internet. And so in this one, I was a bit more cautious in naming it. And so with Tweed, what I wanted was a 4 to 5 letter word that was an actual word, that was a double entendre, that smart people would remember, because I had to have smart people as my customers for a bunch, because I didn't have any insurance coverage for the customers who were my patients. So my theory was that if you were pretty smart and had a good job, you could afford to be my customer. And if you could remember the name Tweed because it was either therapeutic weed or a nice fabric, I could then use the Tweed theme to name our strains so that the nice 54-year-old lady who has a condition which would benefit from marijuana could tell her friends that she's getting, I don't know, Bird's Eye or Penelope from Tweed, rather than have her tell her friends at the bridge table that green crack is good shit. My thought process on that simply was that if my patients could be customers, and if they could tell their friends in a way that reduced the burden of being on medicine that they got benefit from but couldn't tell friends, it actually would become the best way to have more customers. And so that was Tweed. Tweed was killing it, and then Snoop noticed that Tweed was pretty good. And I thought one of my friends was joking when they sent a note saying, yeah, I'm Snoop and we're really interested to work with you. I'm in Canada, how would I expect that? That's 2.5, 3 years ago. So once we started killing it with this medical brand, and Snoop was getting a bit confusing, so we started a thing called Spectrum. Now, if you're a patient and you get Spectrum Blue, which is a balanced CBD THC, and you find that helps you sleep, what we can do is take you on a journey where we put that product through clinical trials into formats of delivery that can allow for dose inhalation or time-delayed delivery, and that we can actually seek to get confirmation of efficacy against the indication of inability to fall asleep or stay asleep. And when we succeed at that, which I hope is before the end of 2018 first trials through probably 2019 to get what in Canada is considered drug identification number, which means insurers can and will pay for cannabis as a medicine. And we will no longer have to put up with this nonsense which people say there have been no successful clinical trials. I'm not sure in Canada, when it was the illicit market selling all the cannabis, who people thought would be paying for the clinical trials. Like, is organized crime going to pay for clinical trials? Probably not. And so I think one of the benefits of creating a larger company in a sector that needed it is you actually have the capacity to fund and operate trials to get to an endpoint that says, this is medicine. And so Spectrum is how we deliver that message, brand, and outcome. You'll notice we have 2 ticker symbols. In Canada, it's pretty remarkable. The actual exchange contacted us about 2 years ago and said, we're going to move to 4-letter tickers, and a whole bunch of people are asking if they can have the one weed, and you're our only company that we think grows weed. Would you like it? Jesus. You don't usually get a regulator calling you that kind of thing. And so we briefly, for 4 or 5 months, hesitated on adopting it, only because, you're spending all your time to try and exit prohibition elegantly, right? I convinced Deloitte that they're going to have the privilege of having their very first marijuana customer at Deloitte, and they actually bought it. And so Deloitte became our auditor, and a whole bunch of things are going along, and you think, well, should we be called weed? Ultimately, we concluded no one else should have it, so we became it. And then we reached out to NASDAQ about a year and a half ago, and they were pretty comfortable with us coming on. And then we got busy with Constellation, so we parked that. And about 4 or 5 months ago, we reached out to the New York Stock Exchange. Because I can tell you, like a year and a half ago, nobody in their right mind would have called New York Stock Exchange and said, can we list our weed company on your exchange? That would have been for sure no. We thought a lot had progressed, and when we called them, the answer was no, you can't. And then a couple of weeks later, maybe. And then you get to yes. The only thing that yes came with is, weed is not a good ticker on the New York Stock Exchange. And so we have reserved that, but we're called CGC for Canopy Growth Corp there. And a little side story on it, we started trading about 2 weeks ago, but you may have noticed we didn't ring the bell. And they're not quite ready to have us ring the bell. So it's kind of like, I felt it was a bit like, so I'm your girlfriend, but I can't be your friends. And I was good with that, actually. So, how did we get here? Well, prohibition is a funny thing, and barriers actually is, the opportunity we're all pursuing is because of these acts. And in Canada, in 1923, we decided to kick it up with prohibition, and then we jumped on board with the United Nations in 61, 71, and 88 to make sure there's just massive United Nations held barriers around cannabis. And if those barriers hadn't been dutifully built by people over the last 50 years, we wouldn't actually all be here gathering to think about how do we knock those barriers down. We wouldn't have a business opportunity. It would all be inside of big pharma and big booze. So in a weird way, we actually have the opportunity because of these crazy barriers. But we shouldn't think they're all going to fall down. So if you want to move cannabis legally from, say, Canada to Germany, I can't tell the Germans they have to take it, nor could a person in the EU tell the Germans they have to take it. The German Minister of Health has to say, I would like some cannabis, and approve it to come from a place which produces it under a federally regulated system, which has a control standard which meets the German safety standards, which is called GMP, Good Manufacturing Processes. And these barriers, if they stay in place, means, I believe, that every country is going to have a conclusion, which is they actually, if they adopt cannabis as a solution to medical and or rec, they're going to require you to produce it in their country. And the reason is, where I started this was an abandoned derelict factory in a town with unbelievably high unemployment, with a ton of electricity on the grid not being used, loads of natural gas, and when I showed up, the jobs count went way up. We had about 500 people into a business in a small town with 7,000 people that were largely out of work. And when you're running Germany, you have a place called East Germany. When you're running Denmark, you have a place called Central Denmark. When you're running Belgium, you have a place called the Mining District. Every country has a part of the country that needs jobs. And cannabis creates jobs. And so I think this idea that we're going to ship stuff all over the world assumes that people get elected in other countries by not creating jobs, but by exporting jobs. And because of these tariffs, you have all kinds of unbelievable ways to screw around with public policy so you keep the jobs in your country. So I hope that it becomes more rational globally, but I also don't mind how this is going to work. And I don't want to diminish anybody's business idea that they're going to build something around the equator and it's going to export stuff everywhere. But I've been to about 20 countries who are in the game of cannabis. Every one of them is willing to export, not one of them is willing to import long term. Okay, so we're all exporters and there's no imports. I don't know that that business model works. Canada was forced to deal with cannabis. In 2001, there was a Supreme Court case that says medical product, medical ingredient, you can't withhold it. They started to regulate it because they had to. The government didn't want to. And the way they regulated it is they said, well, we don't have cannabis, why don't you grow it yourself? Congratulations on winning the court case. That had some unintended consequences. It made it very difficult for police to know who was growing it lawfully and who was growing it as a way to make a lot of money unlawfully. And so they moved to this thing called MMPR. Doesn't much matter what that means. It just started in 2014. That's what created Tweed and Canopy, which was the idea that this would be regulated at a large scale and it would be nationally available and it would be governed like it's a narcotic. When I say that, across our 8 locations we produce cannabis, we've had over 200 inspections by Health Canada individuals who on an unannounced basis arrive and begin looking at everything they want, from have you run your login, sign-in book properly, to how's your inventory control system, to what tests are you running against which products. Over 200 inspections. And the effect of that is that we have a very controlled system, but you have a very high overhead. So if you're trying to produce cannabis in like a 30,000 square foot facility, keeping the regulator happy is going to cost you almost everything you produce in terms of the bottom line. So we've learned over time, one of the first companies I bought had a 60,000 square foot building. Do not want one ever again. Smallest building in Canada that makes any sense is about 120,000 square feet. And greenhouses that are over 1 million square feet, way better than 500,000 square feet. Now, that's where we are, which is, in a simple way, they created a platform of supply to help the patients. That was the prior government. Our prior government was kind of Tea Party. The current government's kind of Democrat. And they actually collaborated on cannabis becoming recreationally available, because had the first one not made the medical platform, the second one couldn't have promised to extend it to adult access. And so it's a bit like the Republicans enabling the Democrats to win an election based on making pot available. I realize that scenario might have to start with like Once Upon a Time right now. That's what went down in Canada. And so we have almost no political risk that this is going to get undone, because 68% of Canadians who are over the age of 18 want it regulated. And that's not for medical. They want it regulated for a party. And it's because we pay a lot of taxes. We don't like when anybody sells stuff that doesn't pay taxes. And for the most part, Canadians are just seeing it as a thing that needs to be regulated. It's not a new thing. Which, we haven't done a ton of stuff first and right, but I think the public policy around pot was pretty good. But you gotta go back to like that really old phone, the United Nations and maybe diabetes, to say what else did Canada get first or right. This is a big deal. And I would think that if you looked at the entry logs into Canada, we've hosted over 30 countries and or international regulators who are coming to Canada to try to figure out what have they done, how have they done it, and how do we repeat it everywhere. And so it's like, on a weekly basis, it's the same movie of a head of a health department coming in from a country to ask almost all the same questions. So it's like watching the same movie over and over again as we host these guys. It's just like, it has different accents. And it results in them understanding a platform that if you're a bureaucrat, you only want one thing, which is not to be embarrassed in how you roll something out. And so I think you're gonna find the platform in Canada gets adopted almost in its exact form in almost every country of the 29 that's currently looking at this. And it allows us to compete effectively against this kind of branding. We actually now are going to have, in September, stores stocked with product in containers approved by a federal government and a state government that have a little excise tax wrapper on them, have a company's name on them, and you can decide if you like that company. You can decide if you like the fact that Tweed filled up a chocolate factory and created all these jobs, or if you like another brand. And it's a big thing, and we're having a big discussion in Canada about could the government allow us to do even more branding. So can you imagine a provincial and federal election discussion is, should marijuana companies get to do more branding or less branding? Should they be allowed to, and this was our Senate, should they be allowed to put their name up on billboards or just t-shirts? This is the sort of stuff our federal government's debating, and so far we can put our names on t-shirts and up on big billboards. We just can't actually associate with music and lifestyle. But it's a big evolution from who's out there now. This actually has something to do with something. I think it's critical, if we're going to build businesses that have community support, that we really think about communities that we occupy. And so a short sidetrack, when I bought the Hershey factory, don't conclude that I spent a lot. An abandoned building that's been empty for 5 years, that has no future purpose as far as anyone else can see, in a town where there's no jobs and no need for that building, really does not have a high price tag. But it also had no active plumbing because it had been empty for 5 years. So when we bought it and we began constructing it, we needed those things. And when I got to the construction site the first day, those things were from a town about an hour away. So I closed the lock on those things and said the guys and ladies working at the site couldn't use that one unless they could confirm there was no one closer who rented those things. And I explained the reason was that in about 3 or 4 years I expected to be recruiting PhDs And if I wanted to get PhDs, I had to have a town that wasn't absolutely in despair. And if we rented those things from the closest place, whoever owned that business might be a little bit well off compared to how they are today, and they might go out for extra restaurant meals. Maybe they'd actually invest in a restaurant. And as we do that in everything we do, eventually the town won't be derelict. It'll have a vibrant live theater, which it does now. It will have enough restaurants that you have diversity, so several have opened. It will actually have hotels that you would want to stay in, which it does now. And so when I try to recruit PhDs to come to Smiths Falls, which was that terribly derelict town, they say yes. And I would argue that we all have to, in creating our businesses, actually get those things and the logic of those things really close to where we are going to be operating so that we support those towns. In business world, they call it corporate social responsibility, which I think is a totally huge lie unless you actually are doing it because it services the business. And so our business model, I think, as entrepreneurs is if we have local support, no one's going to be able to shut us down. So there's the Hershey factory on the right, a little bit of our greenhouses, world-class production. We have a lot of production. Like, I love bringing people from US states up, because if you have 6 million square feet of production, if you have a greenhouse that's 1.7 million square feet and people start walking around it, for the most part, that's quite a lot larger than you would find in an average production facility in the States. And we had to go to that scale simply because if you think about having probably 6 million Canadians who are going to become customers starting in September for the next year, as the first time they can legally buy cannabis from their government ever, you need a lot of product. You also need a lot of extraction. I saw a little bit of extraction gear out here. I'm finding the sector is starting to wake up that it's not just about lights and nutrients. Those are important, but it's about how do you process so you can turn it into products above it. And by the way, we chose to have, when you're getting GMP certification, we could have had anybody certify us. I still think being able to say that Frau Liebisch from the German GMP authority said that we're good, it's a bit like saying you're on the New York Stock Exchange. Because if you go anywhere in the world and say that you met the German standards for an international platform, everybody goes, that's probably okay. And I can tell you, Frau Liebisch was no treat. You know, we're around the globe. We're in 9 countries now. I guess we just announced yesterday our activity. It's not even on the map yet, down in the Southern African region. The places we should be are double that. So when I'm out talking to the capital, they say, well, what are you going to use your money for? And I describe those UN treaties, and I describe the fact that the whole world needs what we have, and we've got to get on with it, and that needs money. And so it is happening now. Second last slide. Where you get to is uniform, identical milligrams per milliliter gel caps, as an example. If I want to do a clinical trial, those gel caps are bulked up in terms of the contents with maybe MCT or sunflower oil. Now you can start to think about a federally sponsored hospital where I put people in a bed and I start using an A-B comparison double blind because I can actually have a placebo. And I can actually have every one of the strains put into that format, and then I can start to look at why do you buy cannabis, which we asked about 7,000 of our patients. Which ailment are you trying to resolve? We can see exactly what strains they consume. We can see exactly what cannabinoids and terpenes are in those profiles that match with what your observational trial has informed you. So now you're already step 2 or 3 in the clinical trial process, because in Canada, everybody's really in a phase 4 clinical trial who's buying cannabis anyhow. So when people say, is a clinical trial big and expensive and take a long time? Remember, we're not testing whether or not there's a high level of mortality or morbidity. This is cannabis. We've confirmed there isn't. And so I think there's going to be a big shockwave of how fast that format and other methods of delivery turn into a finished good drug or a natural health product and start to disrupt the hell out of the pharmaceutical. I find for the second last slide, putting a cute puppy on always brings back people to life. So it's really just a little hook. So you got gel caps. You know where those go. I don't know how disruptive cannabis will be to alcohol, but I know it'll be a lot more disruptive if you have an onset that's sort of 7 to 12 minutes. If it comes in a form factor that's not opaque. If equivalency of ABV, how fast does a beer, wine, or distilled spirit affect you, can be titrated and defined. And for a lot of us in the room, if the promise of 0 calories matters, I'm in. I don't find it a problem to find sufficient calories, especially in New York. So I think that's the form factor. Now, in our one state, our one province called Nova Scotia, what they've decided to do is, why would I make another parking lot and another building and another door to sell cannabis? People are buying it because they just want to have a certain different feeling, another mood modifier, a social lubricant. So what they're going to do starting in the fall is have one parking lot, one store, one door. You walk in and it's a glass wall. On the right-hand side is alcohol, on the left-hand side is cannabis. And in 2019, I bet I get to have that bottle on the shelf on the left-hand side. And imagine the person who's got a $50 budget when they walk in the store and they buy one bottle from the other side and one bottle of mine. Friday night is mine night. Spouses have this. Nobody falls asleep before the Netflix movie's over. Nobody's hungover. Nobody's fatter. They felt uplifted. Friday night might have been a little more fun together than Saturday night, where they used the alcohol-driven outcome. Next week they come back. Do I get 2 and the other guy gets 0? Bet you do. And so that is a big deal. It's the first place on the planet I think you're going to actually see substitution effect directly. And I bet you're going to find there's a whole bunch of booze guys sneaking around doing analytics and trying to figure out what to do about it. Probably one of the worst jobs in the world right now is being the CEO of an alcohol company other than Constellation, because they have an answer about what are you doing to be in this sector. Can you imagine going to a shareholder meeting or a town hall running a beer or booze company? Within the first 3 questions, it's going to be, what's your strategy on cannabis? And to say, well, we have a committee, probably causes your share price to go down 20 points. So this is a big deal. And I put the poppy up, well, it's cute, but we took a position that we want to have an animal care unit, and we want to actually be disruptive to that space for the benefit of animals, while capturing the information and able to help adults. So we're not testing on animals, we're helping animals and getting the information from them. And animals are a great category. They seem to be very responsive to cannabis, and we as owners are very responsive to their needs. If Mr. Linton takes Izzy, his 12-year-old golden doodle, to the vet, and they tell me that the reason she has anxiety, reduced mobility, and poor appetite is because she's old, I will agree. And if they say, but she's really not doing great, and you have a choice to pay Mr. Linton's company $1,000 for an enhanced product so that she has better mobility, better appetite, and a better next year, Mr. Linton is paying the money. And I think there's a big segment in society that will, and I think it's going to be a very interesting evolution of veterinary medicine practices. So with that, I don't know if there are any questions. I hope so. I like questions. And I have no idea if there was a time I was supposed to speak for, because I just started talking. Thank you. Yes.
First of all, I'd like to commend you for such an eloquent and effective and to-the-point presentation. And my question is, how do you have a training facility for all your employees throughout the country?
Yes.
Are they spread out, or is it one home?
So we're across the country, and I think you're going to find that every country which has states or provinces is the same, which is the authorities that govern the sale of cannabis will be at the state level or the provincial level. And my theory about 3 years ago is that if you're in the province, you're probably going to get asked to supply to the province, so we set up in most all provinces. On the training part, this is a growing business. When we used to hire people to come in customer care, call center, we've had 2 people quit in 3.5 years in a call center. Only 2. Now, we had to fire some people because we weren't perfect at hiring, but when we first got them, the first person I hired, Jackie, to run the call center, she said, well, what kind of phone system do you have? I said, well, sort of hiring you, so you pick what kind of phone system we have. And from there, we began a progression of training. If you work in our customer care now, you have 2 weeks of training. First week is actually electronic training, so we know that you learn everything we want you to know from our knowledge base. Second week is you're online, but you're shadowed. And that's an example of each of the segments of how we do our training. To the point where we've now seen over, I think, 50,000 physicians. We've hired all these people who used to work for Novartis and Pfizer and all these places because they know where the doctors are. But now when they go see the doctor, they're not talking about what they used to talk about. They're talking about cannabinoid-based therapy. And those people have seen about 50,000 doctors, and we've learned all their objections and more, and we reference studies, and then we flip that over and turn it into a PACE-based online training system that we can train retail sales clerks across the country on all the sorts of outcomes, questions, and things that you might expect doctors would have had. Now you need to turn it into how do you become a certified retail salesperson. And the reason we're doing that is our biggest risk in the sector is that people come in and think they are going right to the deep end. Because I do not want to be the category of tequila, right? We want to have people feel comfortable, start slow, go slow, and get in. And so we're really trying to make sure that that onboarding process in the first year is effective. Oh yeah, let's look at all the questions, yes?
What's the barrier level of entry? Can anybody, any form of the greenhouse enter?
Yeah.
How do you get this stuff to be really in Canada, in the United States?
Yeah. So 2 questions, barrier to entry, and can I get him some? I think to paraphrase. We're federally licensed. There are about 100 or so licenses granted. We have about 10 of them. There are no specific thresholds to getting in, except it's a bureaucratic process and you have to meet a whole bunch of design and security criteria. So an application on how you would securitize a greenhouse turns into something like this thick, and it's all about the standard operating procedures. We're really principally governed on not losing cannabis. Like if you had to actually flip it upside down and say, what is all this about? It's about not losing cannabis. They don't want it to go to the wrong place. They don't want it to come in and from the wrong place. It's all about that. I would say that there's likely to be more licenses, but not an unlimited number because the bureaucrats have no contemplation of how they would handle an insolvency. So that would be bad. So I think you'll see it sort of slow down a bit. We currently transit cannabis to and have to Germany, Australia, Brazil, probably another place. But it's only where the federal government on the other side asks for it. And so the way we could come to the US would be if the DEA said we need some cannabis because of testing goals. Because I think currently they principally get it from University of Mississippi and maybe a couple other facilities. And I don't know that they get the most stabilized product. But we haven't had that request, but that would be the only basis. Yes?
How, could you give a ballpark estimate the cost of a laboratory testing facility where you could run clinical trials?
Yeah, so the cost, so there's a bunch of steps before you get to a clinical trial. What you have to get is what's called a drug master file, which confirms the ingredients are known ingredients are stabilized, because you got to be able to put the same thing through the same paces every time. That took us about 1.5 years. Inside our facility, we have spent tens of millions of dollars on extraction and I'll call it analytical equipment necessarily. Like people talk about HPLCs and stuff. That was the cheap stuff we bought 5 years ago or 4 years ago. You get into the deep end on this. Then you go and typically, because it's lawful in Canada, what I will do is partner with a facility that's either a university-sponsored hospital or a hospital where we can actually use their facilities on a cost per activity. So for example, put someone in a sleep trial at one of the university hospitals was alarmingly inexpensive. And when I say alarmingly, if I want to stay at the Westin in the same city, it's more costly and I don't get cannabis. So it is one of those things that it isn't actually hugely costly, and the cohort you need isn't gigantic, it's 100 plus. And so these things aren't trying to take us, invent a molecule and put it through all of those steps. It's a much shorter and less costly step.
But the laboratory, like specific equipment.
Oh, in our lab, for sure. If you come to Smiths Falls and walk around, we have 2 labs. And per square foot, they are the most expensive part of our facility by miles. Like, I mean, tens of millions of dollars of equipment spent in 2 labs.
Okay.
I love this. And by the way, I'm going to do a quick interview with something called Cheddar right after this at 11:15, and then I'm going to hang out over there. And if anybody wants to ask a zillion more questions, I'm there. Yes, sir.
Yeah. For Democrats and conservatives here, people, if there's one place on the Venn diagram where we intersect, it's probably marijuana. But our politics are so much different. How far are we, how can we get to the place where Canada is? How far are we behind on a federal level?
Well, I would say everything is going to start with the patient, right? What you're going to do is get a platform for medical. It will be seeming, I think because of the opioid crisis, veterans, I don't think it's as far away as people might consider. And once you have that platform, every country in the world starts with a patient and moves to the party. And it's just a logical progression. And so I think a priority of the patient is probably going to be very successful, and it doesn't feel like it's so far away. Like, as a company, we have like a go bag, but it's actually the opposite of what everybody else has in the US. Our go bag is to come to the US. And it's to come here when it hits that platform of medically permissible. And it feels like there's enough ingredients coming together, but you know, if you would have told me 5 years ago, we would have had a federal election where the principal topic was, elect me and I'll get you cannabis in a store, and the guy would have won, I wouldn't have anticipated that. So it's pretty hard to predict exactly politics. Now, fortunately for us, and you know, you and I suffer a little bit from this, he actually also had super great hair, and so he won on cannabis and the fact that he had great hair. Yeah.
Who do you view as your most significant peers and competitors?
Well, for sure, in Canada we have something called organized crime. They're my best competitor. And so, like, for the most part, I otherwise don't actually have a rear view mirror on how we run this, because our principal problem is what we run into, not who's behind us. And so I don't actually, I don't view anybody in our sector as a competitor, and I don't see what they're doing as directly infringing on what we want. But the illicit market does okay, right? They do somewhere between $6 and $9 billion of business a year in Canada. And the goal in all these geographies is simply to make available a supply chain that is sanctioned. And how many will migrate? I think quite a lot. Yes. You, yes, with the blue shirt, the blue, yeah. And then you get to go next.
What barriers, if any, will Canopy face in supplying the recreational market in Canada, if recreational marijuana is legalized in Canada as expected?
Yeah, so what are the barriers to rec? The first year, it's all these stores are opening up that have zero inventory. So what they're trying to do is make sure they sign up a supply chain that will keep the stores first filled and then refilled. And we've been fortunate to be selected by all the provinces that have announced that they want product from us. And it's not that they particularly like or dislike us, it's just that if you're a bureaucrat, your objective is not to look bad and have a failure. And we're pretty good at mitigating against that at the scale. The next wave, which is 2019, second half, the barriers will be more about, have you invented products which can show that they've been tested and are safe and can be put on a shelf and sold. And I think that's where you're going to see Canada leap past or over formats like gummy bears. Like, I don't anticipate a gummy bear alley in a provincially run store selling cannabis. But I think they're pretty comfortable with the liquid format, certain other formats. So the barriers will more become, can you create products that will fit with the regulatory regime, rather than just kind of mixing up a batch of gummy bears.
Will there be a separate license or?
No. So these are just existing licenses vertically integrated to expand the business opportunity. And it's kind of unique in that the reason they vertically integrate and give all the opportunity to the producers is if they made it really easy for everybody to produce and you just got to move everything around, it wouldn't take very long until the illicit market was principally supplying all the THC. Yes?
I attended the financial investors workshop yesterday, and more than one speaker was saying that Canada is the front runner right now for producing cannabis, but so many other countries are trying to produce cannabis
Yep.
and export. So what is your strategy to stay on top?
So we just go to every country, right? Like, we have a German division, and it's full of Germans. We have a Danish division, and it's full of Danish people. In South Africa, we got a guy with an awesome last name that's like 17 letters. But you have to be local. And what we're trying to do is not export the product, but take our intellectual property. So like all the things you fuss over, like the amount of plants that we tortured in the early days between porosity and fertigation and lights and everything, you take all that, then you take all the images I showed you of how do you create products. Now, if I can cause a sleep trial in Canada to cause a 52-year-old man to sleep better, I'm almost positive that'll work on a German. And so what you want to be able to do is be able to actually get intellectual property and outcomes, which is a big transformation away from just growing a plant. And everybody's going to export. I have no clue who's going to import, because I wouldn't wait in line to try and send it to Canada, because all Canadian elections run on people getting votes, and right now this cannabis file has been a winner. And it's because all the little disparate towns actually are getting way more outcomes than they would have had otherwise. and they don't have to import. So like, remind me why they want to import. They're not going to. Yeah.
Wouldn't like the more people who handle it, the worse off the product becomes, the more against importing it?
It's all a jig. Ultimately, they probably could, and they may sometime when it gets to like an API level import it. But right now, any government who doesn't want you can say, well, I can't confirm I'm not exporting crime, for example. So how do you know that the bad guys didn't just move to the other country to grow it so they can send it there? There's a whole bunch of funny answers they can give, but they don't do import. Yes, sir.
Yeah, how does Canopy systematically capture its findings and what, kind of strain works best for what condition? And then how do they make sure that that's systematically relayed to its, salespeople as well as to doctors to the extent they can?
So we can't yet make claims. So what we started off though is, once you have a bunch of patients, asking them, why do you buy it? What ailments, what frequency of dosage, what structure of dosage, what duration of effect. So now you've done a 7,000, 8,000 patients observational study because we know exactly what they bought because they're getting it directly from us. And we know exactly what's in it because it's a uniform strain over a duration of time. That's what you feed into then, well, was it myrcene that caused them to be sleepy, or is it something underneath that causes myrcene to be in the plant? So you can start playing with taking things in and out. Then you can look at methods of delivery, dosage, and that's where you get to the end point, which you can actually make a claim against indication, which is what we're working through now. Once you can make indication-based claims, you're in a whole new league. And that's the game to be run.
But by the way, when you just talked about the terpenes, are you guys using plant extracts outside of cannabis to add to any product?
Not right now in Canada, because what you need to be able to do is show that everything that you're producing and using that could be an active ingredient came from the plant. And if anybody wants to leave, I won't hold it against you, but I love this. The lady at the back, right there behind you, you know what I mean. Yeah, you.
Can you share with us your perspective on the regulatory environment in the U.S.? And is anyone from this country looking to Canada as a precedent for making changes here in the laws?
So we've had a lot of sheriffs come by. Believe it or not, I think if you Google us and go through these registries, and I had somebody who's a legal aid person said, how many sheriffs have come to you? Because it keeps coming up in all these presentations by sheriffs as a model of regulatory control. State by state, I'm not very familiar because it's just too difficult to keep track of. Ultimately, I find it's getting more complicated in the US because it seems to me like there's going to be a whole bunch of state by state, state right kind of things, even if it comes in, which I get why you want to keep your jobs in Colorado. I'm not down on that. But it's pretty hard to actually get scale. If you don't get scale, part of the reason I like acreage is if you get scale, you can actually have budget. When you have budget, you can actually do clinical trials and you can actually go through these steps. It's kind of be careful what you wish for. Because if you don't have enough cash flow and you don't have enough size and you can't raise enough capital, you can't actually get to the end point, which is to say this is why it works. Yes, sir.
You mentioned September as the start of adult legalization in Canada. Is that definite, or if not,
well, so it's really just like what I think makes sense. They're going to have a vote on September 7th, or June 7th, which will, I think, absolutely pass. And for people who are from the US, we have a Senate in our country. It has a lot of things in common, like it's mainly old white guys who kind of go to there sometimes. But ours is unelected and yours is elected. So I don't even want to try and explain the unelected nature of our Senate. But they have the right to decide certain things and they're going to have this vote. And then it will become formalized law by July 1, which is a politically important date, which means that you need 6 to 8 weeks for the provinces now to fill all these stores because it's illegal for a province to buy cannabis right now because nobody can sell it to them. As soon as it passes, we can. And so we'll have a whole bunch of trucks filling a whole bunch of stores for about 6 or 8 weeks, which would get us to about September 1 when they can start selling it. And I'm not sure that every province will do the same thing, but I would be very surprised if all of the ones in the eastern area are fully on. Because whoever's first is going to get the traffic, and this is a competitive business running provinces. Yes?
What percentage of your current workforce across all the positions has a cannabis background?
Well, if I start at the top of the org chart, I always point out, I have about 8 people I show there, and they all have multiple degrees, and only one has multiple arrests. And, but it's just a thing, right? You'll get more shit if you come to a job interview in our shop and lie about your rubs with the law or your experience. So even if you didn't get caught, if you did grow quite a lot of it and knew where to bury the barrels and stuff like that, we want to know. So I would say that in our growing operations, there are a great mix, but it goes all the way up to the guy who actually runs Canada is the guy with the multiple arrest thing. So I think in our world, scale changes a lot of stuff. So like if you're growing in 3,000 square feet, it's a bit similar to 30,000 square feet. It's not so similar to 30 million square feet. And 3 million square feet. So what you have to think about is the people who came from cannabis, how do they take those bits of knowledge, experiences, perspectives on everything from fertigation to porosity to genetic evolution and scale that. So like we have a breeding lab that has a guy that knew a lot about growing cannabis in a lot of hills who works with a Chinese PhD lady. And it's the most unusual pairing, but it's pretty effective because you got really the combination of what will people like and what is the plant telling us in a scientific way, as an example. Yeah.
Obviously, a great move with a lot of potential synergies with constellation rooms going down, but what about the other side of pharmaceutical aspect?
Yeah, so we have a thing called Canopy Health. The farm, so I think within the next 2 years, you're going to see pharma all over this. My business model is that I would sooner buy a small biotech who missed it on whatever the theory was than share our margin with a big guy. And so why? Well, what are they going to bring us? They're going to bring us a bunch of products that conflict with the outcome of this one. That means they're not really betting 100% on us winning. This is just more mitigating them losing. So that doesn't mean they're like super motivated. And so I think you're going to find that they'll be in it with some folks, but really where we want to go is, why can't we do it? And so pharma will be around, especially like if you're selling anything that causes people to sleep. I think that thing from Roseanne didn't probably help Ambien at that time. Like, I've always been saying Ambien sucks. Now I'm like, holy shit, I don't even want to pick on them anymore. So like there's a lot of disruption coming. I promise I'm not using Ambien at this point in time, so anything I said I cannot blame on anyone else. Yeah, guys.
You've gotten a lot of serious questions today. I got another one for you. What's your favorite strain?
Well, so this is a hilarious one. When we started, so imagine, here you are, you got a 500,000 square foot Hershey chocolate factory, and then you buy a almost 400,000 square foot greenhouse. No one's had a greenhouse license before, and we had no genetics of our own. And so we had to buy all our genetics from the people who were in the early market growing their own. And so they either sold us stuff that they didn't know what it was, or they sold us stuff that they didn't know what it was, and they didn't want to tell us the truth. And so we were phenotyping and trying to grow stuff forever. Like we were high-fiving when we had some of the plants not herming and stuff. Like it was a, to put it lightly, our ability to improve from where we began was impossible to get worse. And we did that, and we did okay on the indoor grow. But where we really struggled is when it's time to go in the greenhouse. So when we got this greenhouse, we sent 12 genetic types down, and in the first week, we killed half of them because they were so pissed off they were in a greenhouse and the way we were operating it. And when we finally got through it, we had Jack hair strain that actually survived and did okay. And so everybody was like, we don't know if it's great or bad, but it didn't hermy, it didn't get bud rot, it actually appears not to be primarily intended to capture all pollen spores on the planet on it, and it got across the finish line. And for our team at that time, getting across the finish line was success. It didn't, and then we actually got to the store, and I had a couple of people reach out to me and say, like, half the stuff you guys are selling is crap. And I'm like, so you're saying the other half isn't crap? Like, because we're really just beginning. And so it's kind of a, you know, as time goes on, things change, and we have patients that have given us some nice stories in terms of some high CBD strains that have helped some children quite a lot, and there's some ones that are special there. And we have one which is called Devon, It was for a friend of mine who passed from cancer and was quite helpful to him. So there are some which are special, but as a team, actually having something work in those first year or two, that was a pretty big deal. Now, like honest to God, when you look back in this sector, everything that was so hard 2 years ago, you go like, how are we so dumb? And so like, there's nothing wrong with tons and tons of mistakes. For sure, Canopy has made more mistakes than any company in the sector, by far. But we try to make them and learn, and nobody ever feels bad. Like we have a rule that you should not ask, you know those buttons? Do not ask what happens if you push the button. Push the button and figure it out. And you gotta go that way, otherwise you just go nowhere. Okay, why don't we, if people want to chat more, I'd love it. I want to bring the microphone because I like it, but thank you very much for your time.